Welcome to Living Out Loud with your host, Jess Phillips, where we talk all things addictions, codependency, relationships, and the good, bad, and ugly in between. Hi, everybody. My name is Jess Phillips. I'm super grateful you're here. I'm a master's level clinician and a relationship and attachment trauma coach. I help freedom-seeking women regain their confidence, master their triggers, and communicate their needs so they can finally put an end to toxic relationships, low self-worth, feeling like an imposter, and become more authentic, trusting, and secure. I know exactly what it feels like to be spinning in circles, stuck in obsession, and living life with all or nothing thinking. After years of failed relationships, impulsive decisions, yo-yo dieting, and riding emotional roller coasters, I knew I needed to get to the root of my issues and that I couldn't go on like this any longer. And that's exactly why I created the 10-week Secure Self-Coaching Program. I was tired of wasting time and money on professionals that didn't understand me. And I knew that trying to fix my own problems with the same thinking that got me there wasn't going to help me get any closer to my goals. If this sounds like you, feel free to send me a message and we'll set up a free consultation call to see if my program is right for you. You can find the link to my website in the show notes. Now back to the show. Enjoy. Welcome everyone to the Living Out Loud podcast with your host, Jess Phillips. And today we're going to be talking about impulse spending. You know, back in the day when I first got sober, I thought maybe I was the only one dealing with the extreme satisfaction that I felt every time, not only that I would go to the mall, but even thinking about a potential purchase, I could feel this like excitement start building inside, and I could get off just on the idea of buying this thing, sometimes more than actually buying it. And there was a lot of that narrative for me, you know, because I was a recovering alcoholic, because I was a recovering addict, then I must be highly addictive in all of these other areas. But now that I'm a couple of years older and a couple of years wiser, I have come to understand that impulse spending, impulse buying, debt, and frankly, all kinds of other addictions, gambling, you see internet addiction now, social media, you name it, pornography, it doesn't discriminate. It can affect anyone and everyone across the board. And I think it's a super important topic to be talking about because it's also a very isolating topic. You know, any addiction that we can form, what happens? It becomes our little secret. And when it's our little secret, the pain can just grow worse and worse and worse and worse because of the shame that a secret creates. So, you know, I'll do my best to share with you guys what any kind of impulse spending or shopping or ideas or fantasies looked like for me, can still look like for me today. And at the end, give you a couple of tips on how to put a little bit more space between your exciting thoughts around purchasing and doing the actual purchasing itself. So, you know, back in the day when I put down drugs and alcohol, there was a very long period of almost restlessness, right? Like you took my teddy bear away from me. You took my favorite toy away from me. And now there I was just stuck on Jess. And I didn't really know what to do with myself. And thank God for recovery communities and places to go. And a lot of rebuilding was happening. So, you know, getting a job, going to recovery meetings, cleaning up the wreckage of the past. But at some point, a lot of that levels out. And in hindsight, looking back, a lot of that cleanup process was actually quite addictive itself. Because if you give me something to do and something to build and something to work for, like I'm all over it. Like put me in, coach, I'm ready, I'm gonna do the best job and I'm gonna go for it. But what happens when the to-do list reaches the bottom? Now here I am stuck with myself again. And this whole idea of doing the inner work, I used to hear that early on, roll my eyes. I was 21 years old and it was like, you know, you need to do the inner work. And I was like, shut oh, what does that even mean? What does that even mean? Nobody taught me. They would say it, right? And I think it's one of the reasons why I love to help people and teach people about things today, is because I really didn't like these nuanced, very blanket statements that people would give me in the past. Like, oh, Jess, you're just codependent. Okay, what do I do about it, please? You know, so, you know, telling me back in the day that I was just an addict or just this, and this was the reason that I did things, it didn't really help me work on that kind of hole in the soul as a lot of people used to talk to me about. So what did I start doing, right? And it was really interesting. And the tricky thing about any type of addiction or being impulsive is that you don't really have an objective bird's eye view on what's happening to you in the moment. It's why people essentially go to therapy or hire coaches or go to recovery meetings, because they need an unbiased opinion outside of themselves to be able to say, like, oh, hey, wait a minute, like this looks like a bit of a pattern happening. But when you're in it and the blinders are on, can't see anything. That's why we stay in toxic relationships for so long, because we're like, no, we got to fix this and it'll be okay tomorrow, and we're going to solve all of our problems. But anybody from the outside in is looking in like, oh, like that's really intense, you know, that's really intense. So it's really helpful, to be able to shine light on some of these things as well, to move away from that kind of secretive behavior or that highly emotional behavior. And at the end of the day, spending can be highly, highly emotional because there's such a high reward. So what I did start to notice that was happening only years later, it's very easy to talk about things in hindsight, was that the moment my life became more peaceful, which is a real catch-22, because my ego was telling me that's what I wanted. That was the goal. I really want peace. I really want happiness. I really want to just feel at rest. And it's like, did you really want that? Because every time you got it, you were like, what can I go mess up? You know, what shit can I start? Why? Because I'm bored and I'm squirrely on the inside and I need something to do or something to play with. And it's 2024 now. This is only actually getting worse. Like, thank the heavens that I got sober and I'm able to surround myself with people who can call me out on these things or help me through these addictive patterns, because you know, I was talking to a group of young people last week about this. If things like TikTok, Instagram, all online dating, if all that was alive and well when I first got sober, I really don't know. I really don't know. It was still, and I sound so old saying this, but 17 years ago, I was sitting on the train or the bus, because I had no driver's license, I had no money, going to meetings or going to visit my rehab, and I had a book and a coffee and my thoughts. That really was it. And honestly, that's peace. Like, looking back now, I'm like, wow, what an amazing ability to just sit there instead of having to be constantly entertained by something now. So, you know, even more importantly, I think it's such a hot topic, not just for people in recovery. It's this idea of this like instant gratification. You know, I remember when COVID hit and everything shut down and people were terrified. It was a very scary time. And I remember a friend reached out to me and she's like, oh man, she's like, my binge eating's been bad. And I said, I get it. You know, everybody's home baking bread and muffins and we're bored to shit. She's like, I just had movie theater popcorn dropped off at my door. I said, fuck off. Are you serious? From the Colisée Kirkland, like this major movie theater in the Kirkland that wasn't even showing movies because it was closed. Like, the movie, we couldn't go see movies, but they kept like the snack counter open, I guess. I didn't ask her, but in my head, I was like, that was for sure a $35 bag of popcorn, you know? And I just thought, and there's zero judgment. I mean, the insanity that I have gone through in my life, there's no judgment coming from me, but it was just, when you hear it coming from somebody else, I was just like, man, we are living in an era where you can literally have a person place or thing dropped off at your front door, and you can even leave a note saying, please don't look me in the eye. Don't even make human contact with me. Leave outside and knock on the door and run. And it's like, it is just disconnecting us more and more and more and more. And of course, people are more depressed. Of course, people are more lonely. And of course, it's never scratching the itch because we're over consuming, and we often think that more is going to equate to a higher chance of happiness. And it's actually the opposite. It's less, it's subtraction, right? Like, what is the art of spirituality, right? You see these monks, you see these different people out there, and what are they studying? Sitting with self for long periods of time without giving in to materialism, capitalism, these things. And like, am I going to go there today? No. Am I a highly materialistic person? I like things, right? This has never been a podcast about how to kind of eradicate all of these things from your existence. But I think this inner balance, right? It's like, I love food, but I didn't love spending years binge eating to the point where I felt physically ill, right? It's like, where is that happy medium? Where is that sweet spot that you feel like, oh, okay, like I went shopping today with my girlfriends and it was fun and I put some money aside for it and that's going to be it for a little bit. It's so much easier today to say like, oh, like I have a credit card or I have access to this or that. And it's like, whatever, because there's a disconnection from having cash in hand and a piece of plastic in hand, right? Those are two very different things. And it's quite scary, actually. Thank God I never had access to any credit when I was drinking or using, because I still would have been repairing that damage today. And I know a lot of people who are. So, what is impulsivity? What is impulse spending? And impulsivity is this inability to put any space between your thought and your action. And like, if you want to sum up the majority of my life, that would be a perfect description, right? Exciting thought, zero pause, right to the mall, right to the X, right to Pizza Hut, right to drinking and using in the past. Because putting a pause is quite boring for people who are attracted to excitement. Putting the pause, calling somebody or doing something about it also like elicits this idea of radical responsibility, and now you have to like question your choices and things like that. And it's really not the most flattering choice in the moment. And when we keep things in our minds, I used to have a therapist that said this. He used to say, Jess, your fantasy, especially with people, he goes, your fantasy is always going to be way better than the reality. And he was fucking right. Because I can go like to all kinds of places in my mind. And I started to realize I was doing that with shopping. I could even do that with grocery shopping in the past. I would get excited to go grocery shopping. The thought of just buying and spending money was really, really triggering this strong reaction in me. And it was just, essentially it was making me feel. And it's not necessarily that I was feeling bad, but I've often struggled with not feeling, which I thought was total numbness in the past, which is actually not numbness, it's feeling too many things at once. So it's like, how can I check out of this feeling, especially this feeling of too many things? It's like, let me go laser focus on one thing that I know is going to produce the exact desired effect that I want. It's why so many people, unfortunately, don't stay sober, because they know for a fact, even though it's not a long-term solution, they know for a fact that if they're feeling really bad inside, drinking or using temporarily is going to alleviate them of that feeling in the moment. We don't really care about the consequences. Impulsive people don't care about consequences. It's not a good enough strategy to be like, did you think about the consequences? I don't give a shit about the consequences. I want to feel better now, right? I used to do that with my rent check. I'd be like, man, we're out, we're having such a good time. Let me just cash this rent check and I'll figure out how to get it back tomorrow. Like, what sense does that make? It doesn't make any sense at all. But in the moment, right, we can justify, we can rationalize anything. So, this idea of spending, right? We have to ask ourselves, like, okay, what is it that's going on when we get this really strong, sharp desire to go and spend? Now, if you ask any of my girlfriends across the board, and this is going to be quite a sexist statement, but the majority of us love to buy clothes, right? So there's a lot of shopping. We're talking about it. We're calling each other. A group of friends of mine, we did a no shopping thing in February, and I was just talking to somebody about this, and it was so interesting. I did really well. I didn't buy any clothes, but then suddenly, a few weeks later, I found myself rearranging my entire condo. I was like, I need a fresh look in here. I need new stuff. And then at the end of the month, we were all checking in with each other. We're like, oh, how did you do with the no spending? And I was like, I did great. And then I'm like, but at the same time, so often returning to this almost place of whack-a-mole, putting one thing down and another one popping up, which thank God now I can always reflect on this inability to tap into a sense of peacefulness inside, right? A peacefulness at rest, a peacefulness of just sitting outside, listening to the birds, reading a book. And I can get there a lot more often than I used to, but for sure, I'm still human, and there's still times where I'm like, this poor decision sounds way more exciting than sitting out and listening to the birds. So, and this is on a spectrum, right? And I think everything that I talk about on this podcast is on a spectrum, because we often talk a lot about addictions, codependency, love addiction, impulsivity, ADHD, all of these things. And we have to decide for ourselves, because it's never going to be the same as someone else. Where do we land on that spectrum? And I love this idea of kind of like this balance beam, right? This recipe where, let's say 80% of the week, you're feeling pretty solid. You're in a routine and you're feeling on. And a really good barometer for that is, if you fall off that beam, what does that look like for you? So I made the example of me binge eating. So, 5 nights a week. And this was when I first moved out of my parents' house. So in sobriety, I was probably like 27 or 28. And it was this real sense of freedom, right? I hadn't had that since I had left home when I was young. And I was like, wow, I can buy anything that I want and I can eat anything I want in here. And I'm ordering pizza, I'm ordering Thai food, I'm eating chocolate. I couldn't do that in front of my parents. They'd be like, what the fuck are you doing? What are you doing? But then I was on my own, and it's like, and this is why, I teach a lot of reparenting with clients, and this idea of like, okay, who's the adult in the room right now? Because it doesn't matter how old I get, sometimes I still need supervision. I really need someone to be like, you can eat the Doritos for dinner if you want, Jess, but I don't think it's a great idea. I don't think it's going to be a great idea, especially not 5 nights a week. So that idea of binge eating, that amount of times throughout the week, I'm off the beam at that point. There's something telling me inside, and I can fight it all I want. I can justify it all I want. And again, usually only in hindsight, it's pretty clear, but that is a good barometer of saying like, okay, there's something going on, and this is the impulsive behavior that you're engaging in right now to help you soothe whatever type of emotional conflict, depression, hopelessness, anything that you're feeling, you're masking with this. Okay, fine. But it can be the same thing with the spending, because a lot of people ask me, like, do you think I'm addicted? Do you think I'm an addict? Do you think my partner is this? And really, like, it's such a subjective question. One of my first questions is it starting to negatively impact your life? That's a great line in the sand, because hey, listen, if you're making $250,000 a year and you're a great saver and you're obsessed with watches, let's say, and you buy a watch a month and it's in your budget, I don't think that you're an impulsive spender. That's something that you like to do. Does it seem insane to me to buy a $10,000 watch? Yes. But somebody could look at my wardrobe and be like, that's insane. So it's really, really subjective. So again, take this with a grain of salt. When I do talk about impulsive spending, we really have to look at what's coming in versus what's going out, right? Budget is one of the number one things that I ask clients when they talk to me like about their spending, and I say, okay, well, have you put pen to paper, and do you have a clear idea of what's coming in versus your bills going out each month? And they the look that I get, they look at me like I have 12 heads, and they're like, no. And I get it. And you know why I get it? Because it's the head in the sand theory. Sometimes it's so much easier to not look. I don't want to know. Because if I don't know, then I can continue shopping like, I don't know. I don't know what's coming in and out. I don't know, whatever. I'll figure it out. But when you look at it, when you look at the numbers, because the beautiful thing about numbers, probably why I've never liked them, is because there's no emotion. There's no emotion. It's a calculation. It's very, very black and white. What's coming in versus what's going out. It's not how do you feel about what's coming in or how do you feel about what's going out. These are just numbers, and we can't really play around with that. And that's why, like, the marketing around these credit cards and lines of credits and these offers is actually, in a very sick way, it's genius. It really makes you feel a lot richer than you are. It's like, hey, I remember once I was signing up for a card at Costco because you needed at the time to have this certain credit card. And about 10 minutes later, after she processes, and I was a kid, I was the same, 26, 27, right before I was about to move out. And she turns to me and she's like, wow, she goes, American Express must really like you. And I was like, why? She's like, your limit's $30,000. I said, don't fucking give it to me. Don't give it to me, lady. You know how much paper towel and toilet paper I'm about to drop at Costco if you give me a $30,000 limit? And that's the danger that we are in this society. It's like, that's not money. That's not money. And especially if you don't have a solid idea, right? Like there's, and this is a whole other podcast topic, but the money ideas that we have at our core, where did those come from, right? What's your first money story? A lot of people have this really sweet money story of their parents, rightfully so, telling them, oh, okay, you want that special thing or toy? You're going to save up your allowance for the next 6 months. And a lot of people have the money story of, if I throw a fit on the floor, my parents are going to buy me that toy, right? So we become these adults with these subconscious ideas around money. And then when we get access to these credit cards or these large lines of credit, it doesn't change. So a lot of the times too, and this goes with recovery from addiction to basically anything, if we don't change the schema on the inside, we're just band-aiding a leak, right? Because my mind wants to tell me, once you make a lot of money, then you're not going to be an impulsive spender anymore. And it's like, no, you're just going to be a really impulsive spender with a lot of money, right? Probably buying $10,000 watches, because it's all relative. You know, this great example of, we look at celebrities, right? That's why I loved it when, what's his name, Jim Carrey, when he lost it a little bit, because, and it was so interesting, right? Everybody started to call him crazy. And I've never heard somebody speak so much truth. He was just speaking truth when he lost his noggin a bit, and everybody was like, oh my God, Jim Carrey is losing his mind. And he was like, what is all of this? The more we make, the more we buy, the bigger the house in LA, everybody's being fake, and we're losing these like fundamental old school principles. We're losing the connection to one another. We're losing the discipline. We're actually losing more joy with the more that we have. And he started to get rid of all of it. Like, he just started to shed and go back to his painting and go back to these things that he enjoyed. And you know, and we look at a lot of these other celebrities getting these mansions or getting all this money and dying of drug addiction, right? Dying in their bathtubs, dying in their hot tubs. And it's just like, wait a minute. Is that the answer? Is that what, you know, a lot of us are searching for with this idea of money? And it's not to villainize money. Everybody needs money. We need to make a living. But again, it's underneath it. what do we think it's contributing to our self-esteem, to our value, right? Like, how are we sharing it? How are we giving it back? Some of the happiest people that I know give so much of their time and their money away because they realize at the end of the day, like, there's only so many black sweaters that I can buy, right? There's only so many black sweaters. It's never going to, and especially if there's a deep wound under there, again, it's going to band-aid it for a second, but long term, that's where we really want to start looking at, okay, wait a minute. Is it the instant gratification or is it the delayed gratification? You know, and in the last episode, I was talking about sobriety and how sobriety became my superpower. And it makes it sound a lot easier than it is, but it's the same thing with people who relapse chronically on drugs and alcohol. So I've watched countless people over 17 years come in and out of recovery, right? And at the beginning, say somebody with 5 years clean, they would go out and drink or use, and people would be like, oh my God, I can't believe that they went out. And it's like, I can. Right? It's still this idea of, because pain doesn't stop when you're sober. Life doesn't stop. Family members die. We lose jobs. We lose relationships. It's not just because we're clean and sober. It's like, oh, I don't feel anything anymore. It's human nature to want to feel better in the moment. It just depends on what we're going to reach for. So when somebody decides, like, I'm going to pick up the bottle and that's going to help me in the moment, I totally get it. It's no different than a behavioral relapse. Like my idea, like, oh, if I go spend $1,000 at Fairview right now, I'll probably feel better in the moment. But what happens? What happens is the regret the next day. Again, if it's something that you can't necessarily afford or it's negatively impacting your life. If you can afford it, this is definitely not the podcast for you, so just keep going. But this is really this idea of impulse spending or any impulse action that's making you feel a deep sense of regret after or making you feel chaotic on the inside. So what do we do with all of this? You know, what do we do? And each person will probably think about this and experience this in a different way. And I talk a lot about goal setting, right? And all the different goals that are out there. So school can be a goal, getting sober can be a goal, getting fit again after an accident or chronic pain or all these things that you're working towards. And it's the same thing with spending, right? Like, what is the actual goal? And I think one of the things that works against a lot of people, and it's why actually gambling is one of the worst addictions out there, and especially one of the hardest ones to treat, because if I light my life on fire from using drugs and alcohol for 10 years, let's say, what do I have to do? Okay, I have to eat a slice of humble pie, right? I'm going to go to rehab. I'm going to get sober again. I'm going to need to clean up some wreckage of the past. I'm going to need to get a new job, things like that. But let's say I have a family and for the past 10 years, I've remortgaged the home 4 times and I've spent the kids' tuition and I'm $250,000 in the hole to loan sharks. That's a different rebuilding process. And it can actually prevent people from even trying. And it's the same thing with debt. The people that I know that have had the highest debt can actually check out and why it actually brings people to this idea of like, okay, maybe I should just file for bankruptcy or do these things. And like, everybody needs to do what you need to do in the moment. But it's almost like the larger the debt, the more disassociated we can become from the repayment, right? If we're in $100,000, $200,000, and you're bringing in $42,000 a year, we have a very large discrepancy between like, I don't know, the next 50 years of your life being able to pay that back. And it's a very sobering thought, because again, with companies just giving out money so easily, again, that connection from what we're spending to what we're making, it can be a real disconnect from the two of them. So first things first is really, if you're kind of, scrolling through the list of this podcast and you see like, oh, am I impulsive spender? And you click on it, is really, I'll encourage you to always, before you ask to, and this used to be a terrible fault of mine, I would go and ask like 20 people for their opinion on something. Do you think I'm this? Do you think I'm that? Do you think I'm anxious? Do you think I'm bad in relationships? Do you think I'm codependent? And it's like, what do you think? What do you think? Because that's what's most important. We're always going to need guidance on things, but first steps first is take a piece of paper. What does impulse spending mean to you, right? For some people, it means debt. For some people, it just means feeling chaotic inside. For some people, it means like, man, I have so much stuff in my apartment and it feels icky because I don't use all of it. To some people, they owe family members money, whatever it is. Some people, their closet's overflowing. So first things first is I would journal, what does impulsivity look like for you, or impulse spending look like? Get that down. And then the next step, and this doesn't need to be a complicated process. I used to complicate the shit out of things. And then by the time I'd actually do it, and I was like, oh, that was quite simple actually. Do a mini budget. Just do a mini budget. And especially if you work for someone, it's even easier. Chances are you're getting 2 bi-weekly paychecks. Write down what's coming in per month, and then just write down your expenses. Rent, mortgage, car, gas, food, miscellaneous, shopping. Even if you don't have the exact amounts, just ballpark it. Because sometimes even that, when people aren't used to doing it, is quite shocking. You're like, holy fuck, I'm spending $7,000 a month and I'm only bringing in $6,000. What happens? If we take the emotion out of that, you're going $1,000 in the hole times 12. So by the end of 2025, you're going to be $15,000+ in debt. And then what happens? Now we're going to slap on 20.99% interest on $15,000. Now you're stuck. And that's how people get stuck so easily. So it's back to this idea of clarity, right? A good friend of mine always says, clear is kind, unclear is unkind. And it's towards ourselves too. How clear am I being about my affairs? So getting down a budget, and then looking at what's your vice, right? Where is the impulsivity coming from? Is it Uber Eats? Is it alcohol? And you don't necessarily need to have an alcohol problem. Maybe you just enjoy drinking a nice fine scotch every night, but you're spending, I don't even know how much booze costs anymore, but say you're spending X amount on a 30-year-old Macallan and you're doing it multiple times a month. Write that down, right? So let's say mine is shopping. And justification is a powerful tool because, I was just sharing with a friend that my shopping, I'm not going to Ogilvy shopping. I'm like a little Winners sister, and I'll scurry around Winners and I'm like, oh, $29.99, $19.99, $34.99. I'm like a coupon queen. I feel like the ultimate saver in the moment. But if I'm doing that 8 times a month, like things add up. So even if it seems so small in the moment, right? If I actually calculated how many times I'm doing that, and that's the thing same thing with smoking, same thing with, like, oh, I'm on a diet, but, I was picking at cookies or this just a little bit 6 times this week. Or it's like, you're gonna have a hard time with that calorie deficit, right? Because again, it's just numbers. It's not how we feel about it. It's just the in and out. So get your vice down. You don't have to share it with anybody. And then the golden ticket is really, and I often share this with people too, who I've always been a truth teller. I don't have enough of a filter on my mouth to be like, what's gonna feel comforting and cushioning right now? It just kind of comes out. So a lot of people say to me, like, I'm gonna stop drinking. And I say, okay, what are you gonna do instead? And they're like, well, I'm just gonna stay busy at home. And I'm like, you're gonna stay drinking at home. There's no way, if you get drunk or like a drink every night at your house, on your lazy boy, in front of your TV, you're not just gonna magically take the bottle away and just sit there comfortably without the booze. It's going to return. So the last step is really, what are we gonna do instead? And that's where this idea of change comes in, because we need to cut the routine. We need to put a break in the consistency of what we've been doing. We need to put that magical pause in. So if, I'll use mine for example, I actually find shopping for clothes a stress reliever, whereas for a lot of people, I know it actually creates a lot of stress for them. So this would be a different plan for other people, but for mine, for example, if I've been good all month and then all of a sudden it's Sunday and I'm like, I have the day free, and then all of a sudden it starts, right? Because what am I doing? I'm looking for relief. And I'm like, I'm gonna go to Fairview. I'm gonna go shop. And if my plan is to become less impulsive or save money or whatever the goal is, I'm gonna need to put a bit of a barrier in between my thought and my action. So, you know, I had an old sponsor that used to say this to me all the time. She goes, Jess, just tell on yourself. Tell on yourself. Because, and it's also too, like, I share this with friends, with people in recovery, with clients. I'm never going to talk you out of it. I'm not in the business of talking you out of it, right? Because if I'm trying to talk you out of it, there's something bubbling up for me. I'm going to talk with you. I'm going to listen. I'm going to be a sounding board. But at the end of the day, you're always free to do whatever it is that you want. Because half the time, that's usually where our lesson is doing a bunch of stupid shit or putting our hand on the hot stove and being like, oh man, I'm really humbled by my own behavior again. That's how I learned half my lessons. But having a buddy system where you can tell on yourself and say, hey, I made this commitment to not shop. I'm feeling that bug start again. And I just wanted to tell on myself. I don't want to be talked out of it. Because you can let people know how to communicate with you. You know, I remember when I first heard this magical line of asking someone, do you need me just to listen right now, or do you need feedback? And they'd be like, I just need you to listen right now. I'm like, holy shit, okay, I'll just listen. I didn't even know we could talk to each other like that, because I grew up in a very solution-focused home where I spit a problem, immediately a solution was coming back. And sometimes it's not about the solution. Sometimes it's just about listening. Listening is the solution. Providing the safe space is the solution. So, you know, this buddy system can look like, hey, I'm thinking of shopping. Please don't talk me out of it. I just wanted to put a little bit of space between me at home and getting in the car and driving to Fairview, right? That's a great tactic. And hopefully that can... Because it's like dessert. Have you ever gone to a restaurant and you eat your meal and it was so good and it's smart? The waiter comes over pretty quickly after, coffee, dessert. You're like, fuck yeah, let's go. Let's go. I'm pumped. Everything's in me right now. But say the restaurant's super busy. This actually just happened to me. Say the restaurant's super busy and the waiter doesn't come around for like 10, 15 minutes. What's happened? It's past. It's past. I've let myself get full. It's all sunken in. I don't want dessert anymore. It's past. And it can be the same thing with the spending. It can be the same thing with drinking. It can be the same thing with relapse, picking up drugs again, binge eating, right? You ever have those moments where you wake up the next morning and you're like, thank you, sweet Jesus, I did not order Pizza Hut last night. I really wanted it, but I pushed through. I went for a walk and I woke up and now I feel skinny as shit. And that's amazing. That is amazing, you know? And it's the exact same thing. It's always the pause, right? I work with a lot of people pleasers, a lot of recovering codependents, and they even have a hard time when people are asking for things. So the first thing that I coach them on is, okay, let's role play. So somebody calls you and says, hey, I was just laughing about this one. Hey, can you help me move next weekend, right? This one's laughable in your 30s. Like, no, I'm not helping you move with my broken body. But let's say it's somebody who's in their 20s and they're really struggling with people pleasing, and the person calls, hey, I really need your help on the weekend. I'm in a real jam. Can you help me move on Sunday? What normally happens is the lack of the pause. They get so worried that if they say no to the person, that the person's going to judge them, not be their friend anymore, or worst out of all of them for a people pleaser is be mad at them. So what do they say? Okay, sure, yeah, I'll be there, right? And then we're stuck. And then we get off the phone and we're like, oh my God, why did I commit to that? Now there's room for resentment to come in. So I encourage them and we practice this line. I've even had some clients take a Post-it note and put it on their computer or somewhere where they see it all the time. That says, let me think about it and I'll get back to you tomorrow. It is the ultimate way to put a pause between the stimulus and what comes out of your mouth. And it can be so empowering. Hey, Jess, can you come help me set up with this giant barbecue on Sunday? let me think about it. Let me look at my schedule and I'll get back to you. Even if I know I'm gonna say yes, I still say it. So I stay in practice until my boundaries get really firm. And it can be the same thing with this impulsive move, you know? I actually had a friend of mine, and it was great that she reached out a couple of weekends ago. She's like, oh, I just really wanna go to Burlington and I wanna go to Target. And I said, I totally get it. I love Target. I love Target. And I don't think of any of the things that are in between where I am right now and Target. Number one, we've got distance. We need to go into another country to go to Target, right? I need to go to the United States of America. We need to drive. We need to spend gas, energy. I do not think about the exchange rate because we think everything's a deal, right? Oh my God, it's so cheap in the States. Yeah, until you get your MasterCard bill and you've just added 25 cents to every dollar, so it actually logically doesn't make any sense. What is it that's happening right now, especially for my ADHD folk or anybody who is depressed or lower on the factory setting of their dopamine, right? If we are a grade lower, then these fantasies are gonna bring us super high and they're gonna be like, yep, that's a great idea. And she called and we talked about the fantasy of Target. We actually talked about what she could potentially buy. And if I don't need any more clothes, this woman definitely does not need any more clothes. I've seen her closet. We talked about what she could buy. We talked about coming home with the purchase and then putting it in the closet. And I said, how do you feel? Do you feel any better? She's like, no, I don't think that that's actually gonna make me feel any better and help me with how I feel right now. And it was this beautiful experience of like, wow, that was a major pause. And she even went shopping again with friends the next weekend. And she said, I was able to just sit back and they bought a bunch of expensive shit. And she's like, I didn't buy anything. And I said, good for you. Because it's also not about perfection, right? We win some, we lose some. And that's really what it is. With a lot of these steps, it's, you know, there's been non-negotiables in my life. For me, it is a non-negotiable to ever pick up drugs or alcohol again, because I know the door that's gonna open. Even if it doesn't open immediately, I have very dangerous doors in my life. Has it been like that with spending or shopping? Not really. I'm a hard worker, right? It's not the same like intensity and it doesn't have the same threat or pressure that comes with it. But I know inside I still feel way less chaotic and better about myself when there's more discipline put in that area. So just to run through the steps again, first things first, jot it down. What does you being impulsive look like? What's your budget? What's your vice? And let's build a little support system. Who can you call? What type of space, right? For all my healthy folk out there, can you put a workout in between you and shopping? Can you go help somebody? Can you phone a friend, hop on a FaceTime with somebody long distance? Whatever it is, whatever your space looks like, create a little team. You know, I interviewed a great guy, Greg Champion, on this podcast, and he lives in California, and he talked about having a board of directors for his personal life. He's like, I've got a bunch of women, I got a bunch of men, and he goes, I go to all different ones for different advice because not everybody's an expert in multiple fields. And I was like, man, that's so smart. And it's true. Get a buddy for your finances, get an accountability buddy for your fitness or for your nutrition, get some recovery buddies, whatever it is. And then you have this team also, so you're not exhausting the same person over and over again with like 12 different addictions can be really helpful. So, you know, that's my take on impulsive shopping, budgeting, spending. I hope it helps. If you try out the list, let me know and tune in next week for another fun, juicy episode.
Thanks everyone for listening and supporting Living Out Loud. Be sure to tune in next week for another fun, juicy episode.